Here we are.
There you go.
A few technical issues, which seems to be par for the course for us.
Yep.
And but good to be live. So welcome to People Purpose Place. We've got episode 48 today, and keen to have a really good chat about it. And how are you?
Yeah, it's busy, good, excited about the conversation as usual on a weekly lunchtime. So looking forward to a chat.
Absolutely. So this week's episode, we thought we'd just steal other people's ideas and try and see whether we can become popular by using a tried and true theory, because no one else has been watching. But this episode is who is the rich man of Richmond? Now, obviously, this really started because we had a bit of a chat about this in the last week or so. Just how it turns out Oliver Anthony is not actually his name; it's actually his grandfather's name.
Right.
So Oliver Anthony Music was what he named the music, and I think his last name is Oliver, but it's not Oliver. But it was interesting that someone who had put out an anthem to discontent about the world had gained so much viral publicity in a short period of time, to the point where I even seen him there with Jordan Peterson in the last week. Had done Joe Rogan, and then after that has obviously been picked up by everyone else who wants to have a conversation about it. And there's a bit of and I thought this would be a bit of a parody of a parody, but there's a bit of a common theme on YouTube that people actually listen to other people's music and then critique it, some from a musical point of view, some from whatever context, or how well they sing, or how well the song's done by someone else singing it, or the like. So and I thought we might change it up a little bit, and obviously listen to the song soon, but also it's more the philosophical direction, and for us having a conversation about difficult conversations about things. It's interesting that Oliver Anthony has been able to get cut through in a space where we've been yelling into the silence for quite some time. And it's interesting that that's occurred, and I think that'd be great to talk about and see the parallels of what we're doing, and then also drag out some of the message that's in the middle of that. So before we get into that, I thought it might be good to have a bit of a check-in question, as we do, to try and model this idea of we're all coming to this conversation right now, so how can we be present to make the most of that? And the question we've got for today is, how do you feel the average person on the street, are they more aware of our current challenges of the world, or less aware?
It's a awesome question, and could obviously be a long topic of discussion. But I think consciously people are suppressing any awareness of the conditions in the world. So when we have some of our conversations, it's quite common that we see that penny drop, the idea of opening up a door in their mind to the other side. And for some people, that's clearly quite frightening. And slam the door shut, I don't want to go in there, is sort of the impression I get from quite a few people.
Yeah,
even people in leadership positions who should be taking the front running on solving our housing crisis. In actual fact, they're very uncomfortable in that space.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also, I think the word that I pulled out from what you said, which resonated with me, is consciously aware. So I think the fact, and I've always found it interesting that music is one of those mediums that you can sing along to a song, and then someone can ask you what the content was, and sometimes you're aware and sometimes you're not aware, and sometimes they can say stuff in the song that you misquote the words and all that sort of fun stuff that happens with music. But I do find it interesting that music can sometimes have the cut through to say stuff that if you were just out there on anywhere on the street corner and saying some of the lyrics that we'll hear in this song, you'd probably on the face value, everyone would be going, what are you talking about? We're not paying any attention. But it's interesting that in this situation, that it's had massive cuts through because it's been attached to music. So I think that's non-conscious awareness. So I think that people understand
the or the beautiful awareness rather than the conscious awareness.
Yeah, definitely. So I think they're picking it up, they're taking on board the story and resonating to it, but ultimately they're not being consciously aware of what's happening out there. And I think that was even with the stuff we discussed last week to do with the great unraveling sort of conversation. It's interesting that people are starting to have those conversations, but they're not always as conscious. They're more unconscious in the general scheme of things. So now's probably a good time maybe to see whether Colby can just play the song. And if we play the song in its entirety, indifference stopping and whatever, and I think he's got the text over the top so you can see what the lyrics are, but we can probably come back to the lyrics before we sort of move forward. So
sounds good.
See if it makes sense to roll it.
I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay, so I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, 'cause your dollar ain't shit and it's taxed to no end, 'cause the rich men, cause the rich men. I wish politicians would look out for miners, and not just miners on an island somewhere. Lord, we got folks in the street, ain't got nothing to eat, and the obese milking welfare. Well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, 'cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down. Lord, it's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, 'cause your dollar ain't shit and it's taxed to no end, 'cause the rich men, north of rich men.
That'll get you thinking.
So, yeah, absolutely, and even just I think he does a very good job at just singing it, because you can tell authenticity. And we're only Jane and I were only talking about this just recently. You know, sometimes you see a song where someone, and it might have been Nina Perone or one of those ones like that we saw on YouTube, and you can tell when there's one of the songs that she sings is now sung by Michael Bublé or something like that, feeling one of those songs, and you see her sing it and you go, well, that's a completely different interpretation. And you can tell he's right into that song. but then you listen to the lyrics and the words, and you can understand why it's been polarizing in its nature. But I think, positively polarizing, because there's probably been more people like that than dislike. So, what's your initial reaction?
Yeah, country has been a challenge for me to get into the genre generally. So it's a more recent addition to my suite. So I have that bias or prejudice or hesitation to immerse into country to start with. But then when you listen to his words, you go, it's a very simple message, but profoundly challenging, right? We don't want to get into the words and start digging into that, because why is society so dissatisfied with our lot? The rich men north of Richmond probably got something to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought at this point, when we were working on the script this morning, or the conversation pieces for today, I thought it's important, probably, at this point, and we think we probably need to do this with lots of our conversations, is not only do we have a lens of our own, but we also have essentially the privileges that go with that. And this is a difficult topic, because obviously as soon as someone says, hey, you need to declare your privilege, this, starts a conversation about being far left. In Australia, we don't know where any of this stuff is, but the rest of the world goes left and right. We just go somewhere in the middle in a big mess. But ultimately, that would be a far left sort of thinking idea, is to be talking about your privileges. And his the fact that he's been picked up by the people he's been picked up is probably more right in his message. On some level. But I think it's actually important for conversations to be authentically had. You probably need to be talking about where you're coming from this conversation, right? So there's no doubt that we're, middle-aged white men who probably can't resonate with all of that message, because while we can actually empathize with components of it, we're not living in an extremely poor section of America who's struggling to know, how they can, survive. We're in the lucky country, and that probably has been maybe one of our major problems, is the fact that we've had this illusion of everything being okay and having safety net after safety net and having privilege after privilege provided to everyone in our society, that we probably can't necessarily 100% fully understand where they're from. And we got given a chance to have an education, and he talks about that in some of the other stuff I've seen him, not having a high education, and then, trying to find a way to make $1 working every day, and all of these other things. So I think it is important for us to acknowledge that, we're not approaching this as, we come from the deep South and we understand exactly where you're coming from. But it's interesting that his message does cut through that.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And Australia's suffered, I think, from a very middle ground in every way. We don't have extremes of climate. We don't have extremes of poverty. Well, maybe. Yet if you look, you can actually absolutely find extremes, but we seem to be very comfortable to not look.
Yeah, and I think that was something we talked about. It is interesting that, to some extent, we've had these conversations now for, has that been over a year we've been having the podcast?
Yep.
And if we looked at it, 40 odd episodes or whatever, which is 48 episodes, probably approaching more than a year's worth of actual weekly bits.
Yep.
What it says, and it's interesting that if we go back and have a look at this, the audience levels are minuscule. And, in the same instance, Oliver Anthony, not his real name, has also commented that, he had a handful of people listening to what he was saying until that has become viral. And even it was one of those things. It's interesting how that works, is Joe Rogan had said he had someone send him the video in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then like within a short period of time, he was like flooded with all these other people sending him the video.
Yeah, right.
So it's
and
interesting.
Can Anthony put his finger on what the trigger was? Like,
yeah, and that was going to be my question. It's interesting that we've been here talking about some of the stuff he's talking about. We've been discussing. Obviously, we can't sing. We're not big gingers or rangers, as we call them in Australia. So he's got all the presentation pieces, which makes it easier to disseminate. But it's interesting that he has had that amount of cut through in a short period of time.
Totally.
And also, it's also a reflection of why are people shying away from the conversation we're having. And I think what you said is very true. And this only happened with one of my conversations this week with someone who said, they have to use the assistance of a walker to go and do stuff. And they were reading at, religious ceremonies quite regularly. And, the people had stopped, basically using them to do it. And after, fostering through why that would be the case, eventually the person said, look, we just don't really want to see a person in a walker going up there to have this conversation. Yeah. And I think that's, as you said, is because it's shining light on something that we see in ourselves, or the possibility to see that in ourselves. And it's also a painful conversation. Like it's going to raise conflicting internal views of ourselves and start conversations that maybe we don't want to have. So, maybe the answer is we just need to sing every episode of the podcast.
Right, yeah. I'm up. We can't have less people.
Yeah. I think we can. I think we can probably.
No one's going to stop listening, you reckon?
Yeah, exactly. No one's going to stop listening. And I find it interesting also, like even the whole idea of what cuts through with the message and what doesn't cut through with the message. And I was only considering this as interesting that it's funny how it's just gossip on some level, isn't it? Like ultimately it's someone sharing something else that they've heard about something else or whatever. And I can only think that leads to some sort of social currency. So if you're the first person to share this new cool one and you said, I knew it from the start, I knew this was a great story. And so I'd imagine Joe Rogan would get a lot of that, where someone who finds it goes, I've got to show Joe quickly if they know him, so they can get some credence. So maybe one day Joe says, should we have a conversation about X, Y, Z, and put you in front of 300 million people or whatever his audience is now. So there's definitely a social currency to it, but it's interesting that it's resonated long enough that I understand that he's been offered a $8 million music deal already, and he's sort of turned it down on the basis of that really isn't reflective of how I position myself and what I'm trying to do with this conversation. So that is interesting, though, that that resonates so quickly with people.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's probably open enough to say he's not Elvis Presley, who's going to have generations afterwards reflecting on his musical talent. He's just a place and a time that he's connected with the audience for whatever set of circumstances. And I think even if it's an unpopular message, we would say to anybody that they've got a right to have a point of view and an unpopular message. We may not agree with their message, but we won't deny people their opinion and being able to put forward a story. We might dismiss it or have a different view. And I guess that says to, our message is we have to continue with it, irrespective of, one person picks it up or everybody picks it up. And we're open to the debate. We've always said we're happy for people to come back and tell us why we're wrong, or to challenge our thinking. But it would appear to me consistently that when people have an awareness of what we're trying to talk about in People, Purpose, Place, that homes could actually facilitate great human outcomes, that seems to be a revelation. And shortly after that, becomes quite uncomfortable to realize everything our industry does, everything historically we've done, everything we're talking about now does not facilitate great human outcomes.
100%. And I think it would be actually good. And I actually was just thinking about this, and I know Colby was going to bring up the lyrics soon to have a look at. But it's interesting, even just having a look at the start of the lyrics.
Yep.
You can almost see some themes in there that are coming from those conversations. And I think I wonder whether that's part of the reason why it's had such a powerful impact. Is that he hasn't just started one conversation about discontent. He started, hey, I'm going to throw all of this stuff into one song and see whether people will react to it, because he hasn't just talked about a disadvantaged group. He's talked about so much of that ultimately a lot of people have been able to resonate with it. And I like the idea, I think I've used the statement before, but Gabor Mate has always said that idea. It's better to be disillusioned than live in an illusion. So it feels like we're at that moment. So, but it's interesting, even in the first real message is, I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay. So I think that, shows a real step forward in the whole idea of people are starting to know that even if you work hard, even if you do these things, that's no assurity to being able to be in a good survival position. And
we've spoken about before the lack of opportunity that our kids and our grandkids are going to have. They're never going to have the set of conditions that we grew up with. So this realization that hard work or good job, whatever those terms mean, doesn't equal what they've seen us, white middle-aged blokes, the opportunity we've had is not going to automatically follow from, good job and good work.
100%. So really that, that first statement is that, we had this meme or this heuristic that if we work really hard, we'd be given an opportunity. And he's really saying, hey, look, you can work as hard as you want. There ain't no way that necessarily that's going to be a clear path in life. So I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame. So he's really then also highlighting that even when you do that, then you have issues with the rest of the world's vices, so what are you actually doing it for? What's the sense of purpose in all of that? The answer is none.
Drown your troubles away.
And that's, obviously and I know Colby had actually mentioned that one of his other songs is specifically about using substances as, ways to mask everything that's going on, which we're all caught in the trap of doing, So, and then he mentions, obviously brings it into everyone else's, like everyone's context. What the world's gotten to for people like me and people like you, I wish I could just wake up and say this wasn't true, but we're in a brave new world. And I like his statement after that, which is with an old soul. And I think that's something that's really, obviously there's potentially people out there going to take that with a religious spin on it, but I think it also says that humans have, I think we're feeling like we're not living aligned with what we're actually designed to do on some level.
And well, I wonder, what would a new soul look like if an old soul is valuing what's gone before us and is no longer available, what would we propose a new transactional, soul would look like? Everything's for the sake of what I can get out of it, rather than the beauty of it being as it is.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good question to kick around for yourself. What would you want your kids to value? What would you want the future generation to value as a soul or a purpose?
And then, this reflection of the rich men north of Richmond, I'm assuming that's a part of America where, this one side of the tracks looks like this and the other side of the tracks looks like that, which, I found quite interesting even on the weekend when I went out to have a look at a couple of those properties that you were talking about. You drive around a corner and you go from, houses which were obviously incredibly expensive, and then go around the corner and find, 35 cars out the front of others. And so there is, I think those lines, we used to think Australia was full of the middle of Australia, but it definitely feels, even when you drive around our streets, that there's definitely a change occurring in regards to who has stuff and who doesn't have stuff. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. There's a comment there that Richmond is a city below Washington, D.C., where all the politicians are. So, thank you for that, because that obviously, us coming from Australia, paints a bit more of the picture, right? But I think it's very poignant that they say, or he says, they want to have total control. They want to know what you think. They want to know what you do. And they think you don't know, but I know that you do. So it's funny. This is this awareness piece that we were talking about before that, which is, I think people on some level are starting to become aware of what's happening around them in society, and they're starting to, even if they're not consciously aware of it, they're starting to become discontented with that whole, better to be disillusioned. Now, obviously, we know that one of the conversations about this is, which side of the political divide is he in? Is this a statement from the right, or is it a statement from the left? In Australia, as you said, we muddy the waters somewhere in the middle. But I think the comment that people are starting to understand, no matter what the political system is, that there needs to be a higher level.
The system generally is surveilling us, whether we acknowledge that or don't. We definitely are being watched, tracked in everything that we do. And we're not happy about that.
No. Yeah, and the whole idea, because your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end because of the people north of Richmond, which obviously, from the comments in the chat, is from the political people who are making those decisions about where the tax money goes. So that's a very poignant part. And I'm writing down these themes, which will be interesting to come back to when we get to the end of it, to actually see what draws these themes together and see how it parallels with our journey as well. So, I wish the politicians would look out for miners, not just miners somewhere else. That's sort of, doubling down on both, the other statement is really about, is capitalism working? And that one there is, do we really feel like our political system's working for us as the people in it? And quite often when we make such a big statement about people overseas and, shouldn't we be helping these people and shouldn't we be helping those people? But the people inside of our own nations are being forgotten. And I think you even mentioned that last week when we were talking about, making a big song and dance about getting distracted about the healthcare system, talking about the people who are working, who now don't have to be vaccinated. And we've got this big hullabaloo about all of this, but we've still got people trapped in our aged care system being abused at monumental levels. It almost seems like a bit of a distraction.
What's a distraction that's politically manageable, So we'll allow that to take up the airwaves rather than tackling meaningful change on the issues that really matter and affect the majority of people.
And then, he's really made a tack then, the next paragraph, we've got folks on the street who've got nothing to eat and the obese are milking welfare.
Yep.
But if you're, 5'3" and 300 pounds, taxes probably shouldn't pay for you to continue to be obese. Now, that's obviously he's picked a pretty big thing to bite off there, figuratively and literally. But it's a very powerful message, isn't it? And that comes to the whole idea of society no longer being fair. Like, it's not about welfare picking up the people who are falling out the bottom. It's absolutely about people who can abuse the system.
Yeah.
And we see that so much with some of the things we've been involved in, where we go, okay, well, why is there so much money being splashed around in here for so few people's benefit? And the answer is probably because it's politically expedient to do that. And I find this one interesting, that after he says that about the discontent and what's happening with where money is going between, fairness and the abuse of the system, he then says young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground because this damn country does nothing but keep kicking them down.
Yeah.
And this is something that you and I have spoken about personally quite a bit. About, we absolutely understand the massive importance of women's rights and the improvement of in fairness in all sorts of situations. But it does feel like at the moment that some of that is coming at the disadvantage of other groups, which, and we said before, we need to declare our privilege. It's not like young men, particularly young white men, haven't had a lot of advantages for a long period of time. But it feels like this need to counterbalance is showing up in things like, ultimately, in things like suicide, which I think is what he's alluded to in that statement.
Oh, absolutely is. And the stats aren't really good. And I think the conversation can absolutely be had about, reducing violence in our society. Let's not even talk about gendered violence. Just let's talk about reducing violence would be a good outcome. So it's not owned by any particular demographic, but less of it would be good.
Yeah.
It's not, we don't have to have winners and losers. We can raise up all of our community with better dialogue and better conversation, rather than at the expense of one, we have to diminish the other. That is such an old paradigm that I think there's signs that we're acknowledging that our systems aren't working, and we don't have to pillory, or we don't have to have winners and losers. Maybe we can find a middle ground, or can rise conditions for both men and women. We don't have to exclude one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. I've written down some core themes there, and in our last little bit, it might be really good to come back to this. So, and he goes back again with the lyrics, then to go back over similar sort of messages in slightly different versions. But so you've got this strong message that once upon a time we knew if we worked really hard that there would be an opportunity out the other end of that, and it appears like someone else is taking that opportunity away from the average person who's working.
And recently we've had a few politicians talk to, if you have a go, you get a go, was famously quoted by a former prime minister who was pilloried when he said such a thing, because we all know, even if it's subconsciously, that's horseshit.
Was that recently, or was that some time ago?
Oh, it was in the last couple of years.
Okay.
And we had the chairman of the Reserve Bank say, foolish statements like, if you aren't happy with your rent increase, how about you go out and get a mortgage and buy your own property? Give up on the smashed avocado breakfasts and save up to buy a house. So those Australian equivalent rich men north of Richmond, when they make statements like that, it goes down like a lead balloon in our community. We absolutely acknowledge it's disconnected from the reality. That's not our experience.
Oh, 100%. So, and I think there's more of that, and that's a little bit why I think young people probably are also. We probably don't need to go over the lyrics anymore, CJ, either. So, but it's probably one of the reasons why there is so much discontent is because there's so many factors that are beyond your control.
Yeah.
So the idea that just by working hard or by whatever, there are like literally, I absolutely feel for young people now who are in our regional places who are growing up here. Like, if you want to move to the capital city, prepare to go backwards at monumental levels. So this idea that just because you work hard, that gives you a greater opportunity, as you said, it's absolute rubbish. And his next theme is really around working for purpose. So he's saying that, well, if you can't work for a purpose, you're going to fill that hole with something else. And in our modern society, we've got so many places to fill that hole. Like alcohol's one of them. Hands up, we've all been there, So, and too much food, numbing yourself with all these other things, and it's not anything else other than a sense that this is all hopeless. There's no purpose to this. It's just silliness. Let's get back up and do this silliness again. So you can absolutely see that as a really strong theme, which is we all get and understand, right? We all would now acknowledge, like, once upon a time. No, I would like to. When do you reckon would be the first time that people ever started to have the conversation of, hey, I might be using alcohol in the wrong way?
Yeah, right. Well, I had a funny experience straight out of school that I went to the Defence Force for a year and a bit, and a very negative culture around alcohol then at that time, and absolutely no discussion or admission of that, but clearly a reliance, a problem, a poor culture around it. And from there I went and worked in pubs.
But yeah, my point was, do you think though that, we have these conversations now about acknowledging that? Back then that was just a poor culture, right? There wasn't an acknowledgement that people were drinking too much or using it to deaden their experience. It was just, hey, we all do this and we all join this thing in. So I don't think we actually knew that we felt like we were working for no particular reason or in a big, crazy system that didn't make sense. So I think that's really only very, very recent that we've started to go, like, maybe there's other reasons for obesity, which isn't just about shoveling food in your mouth. It's about filling a space that, gets you addicted, yes, but it's filling a space that's missing from something else. Yep. And I think that really fits in with the next theme that he's pulled out, which is we're living in new worlds with old souls. Now, my bit by that might resonate for a lot of people is I think a lot of people can see that everything that's happening in this new version of a society is not as authentic as what we might have had previously. And I think, you use the word soul, but certainly that traditional way of life, and you need to be careful of that word traditional because everyone goes out as being conservative, and that means, the wife must do this and the husband must do that. I don't think that's actually it. I actually think it's a wholesome connection that
it's a sense of community. A sense of belonging, a sense of community.
Correct. And a connection in that community and a sense of, and we see that so much. Then he touches on the fact that, capitalism seems to be, putting money in some people's hands and not in other people's hands. And we're only talking about that last week about how, how is it that, what do we figure out? 85% of the world's wealth is held by 1% and 99 by 10%. Never, ever in the history of the world has there been that crazy amount of disparity of wealth. And probably go, Genghis Khan was doing this, but he really only had control of half of the world, or even the Roman, the Roman system or the Greek system. They were all still disseminated generally in their wealth. Someone had control. But so this idea that capitalism is not serving us and it's breaking down, this idea of political disconnection is one of the other core themes that he pulls. And it's interesting that he's tying, like it's in the same paragraph of lyrics, he's tying together this idea of capitalism and it not working and the political system and dislocation of who's looking after who. And I think that's really powerful, because that is actually one of my biggest concerns is we really don't know the difference now between our capital system and our political system. We can't separate them.
No.
We have no understanding of who's pulling what levers and why that's occurring. And I think the fact that he's identified that and shine a light specifically straight on it is quite powerful. And I do wonder with people who are writing songs, like we pulled it apart and got, working versus opportunity, purpose versus no opportunity, this idea of a new world that's not actually aligned with our old beings. Yes. Capitalism versus it's not working versus people getting stuff that others aren't getting, political discontent, fairness, and the abuse of the system and how that works. I'm sure as a person who's writing a song, you're not thinking at that level, but it's interesting that those themes are sitting there in plain sight.
In plain sight, yeah.
And put them in a song and they can be said powerfully without pulling the punches, because any of those things by themselves would probably be seen as potentially conspiratorial, just, as in, he's making this all up. But on some level, I don't think any of us are out there arguing with anything he's saying.
No. No, and I think the first response is to find what pigeonhole does he fit in, so I can rule him in or out from my tribe, rather than actually digest the conversation and take on what he's trying to say. So if he's left and I'm right, well then I'll exclude him because he's in the left crowd, or if he's red instead of blue, that's our first pass. So our first listen in conversation generally is to respond, not for understanding. So I'll listen to him and I'll put him into a box and say, this is the message that he's coming from. And then my response is, include it with my tribe or exclude him as the other tribe, which I think is a really poor skill set. It's a very limited way to look at any conversation.
Absolutely. And this idea that the system appears to be one that is just about, there's not a lot of, it's always about playing catch up. So if one group's disadvantaged, then we swing the other way and we smash someone else while
we give
we
more advantage over here to this other group to even it up. And that means we're going to take it from this group and put it over there. Well, hang on, can't we raise all of us together?
Which is the negative conversation about privilege, isn't it? Like so to balance out privilege, what we're going to do is we're going to give one group the privilege they didn't have before, and we're going to take that off another group and bring their privilege down, which is almost counterintuitive, isn't it? And the problem is when we get to that point of providing a group privilege, then ultimately a lot of people want to be in that group. Isn't that interesting that, and we only had this conversation about some, strange groups that are getting, I'm now a part of this group that, less than a short period of time, you'd never want to be in that group. Now everyone's trying to jump in this group because they've now got this artificial boost, which is a privilege at the disadvantage of someone else.
Yeah, privilege card. Yeah.
And as you said, you and I are probably whatever, but you're right. I mean, if you're a young male coming up in today's world, you're probably copping it everywhere. Because they're taking away what is, not your privilege. It was the previous generation's privilege. They're taking it from you. And then, we wonder why people are disenfranchised and suicide and all these other things are increasing. So, but interestingly enough, when you isolate all those bits, You know, the fact that the opportunity isn't there, even if you bust your freckle, the fact that the system is breaking down and it doesn't work, the fact that there isn't a political appetite to do things, the system that is designed to help some people doesn't help other people. You know, e.g., you know, particularly in our situation, the housing system, you know, helps people who can get loans, doesn't help anyone else. This idea of purpose missing, this deep need for an old connection, and the ability to have fairness, and rather than people being pulled down, and this idea that, you know, leveling out the playing field is not fair. So just, you know, taking it from someone and giving it to someone else is not inherently human, and we all acknowledge this. You know, if there was, you know, you hear of those anecdotal stories where if kids are in a sand pit and someone says, "Can you clean up all of the toys out of the sand pit?" and one kid takes out 3/4 of all of the bits and puts them in the box, there's never any kid who goes, "Well, when that kid gets some more lollies than me for that, I'm going to say, hang on, I was doing something, even if I was doing nothing." At a super simple level, we get that it isn't always about leveling out the playing field. That's not life. That's not reality. While there shouldn't be anyone disadvantaged by that process, it certainly shouldn't be something that's tinkered with, because eventually we know that everything that we start to tinker with or level up ends up blowing up in our faces monumentally.
Yeah. And we really should let the nature of things evolve rather than trying to artificially skew results, because that historically we've never done that very well. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's interesting, although, you know, we're talking about stuff very much on similar lines, it's, I suppose, heartening that something like this music has been able to cut through and provide the message in a place where we are yelling into and have no response. It's certainly now a situation where the same core message that's in there is exactly what we're proposing, which is, if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to get more of the broken stuff. We need to try and do something different. So from that point of view, although we would love to know how he's been able to cut through that quickly and get to that many people, it's just positively charged that has occurred, and that people are voicing discontent. And even if it isn't a song, it's certainly something that resonates with a lot of people, which is actually an important thing to have out there.
Yeah, just the awareness happening and people picking up a message. We're not aiming for perfection. And I guess that's some of our conversation. We want people to pick up the idea. We don't want them to take any one example of what we talk about as perfect. Just start the journey about thinking about housing that people can thrive, as opposed to this economic thing to build wealth. The economic thing to build wealth is excluding more and more of us. And that outcome is not healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think as we talked about this morning, we're having a chat about stuff. I mean, we can see that this system is now completely broken on a lot of levels. And we're not proposing what we're putting out there is something that's going to be a home run. Everyone's going to do this and they're going to love it. The answer is everyone will not want to do it. Most, you know, unequivocally not want to do it. And it also will have massive amounts of challenges. But what's the alternative? You know, we've now worked for 400 years to break down everything about humanity. You know, continuing to do the same thing is certainly not going to help us get anywhere away from that. So Ginger has been able to get out there and get a message out there that is challenging people's thinking and getting them to have a different perspective on stuff. So
absolutely, really good outcome.
It feels like a good place to maybe wind it up. But did you have any closing thoughts? Or
I think genuine leadership and genuine carrying a message is so rare that if it happens to be an accidental YouTuber or a whatever that has cut through, we're not going to find it from our conventional wisdoms or what the mechanism of society tells us. Just because our Prime Minister has been elected Prime Minister, they are unlikely to be equipped or interested or have the ability to provide any leadership on so many topics that we need to look for other sources rather than expecting that someone else is going to do it. So that actually is going to fall to us individually to do our own version of leadership and thought-provoking and investigating ideas, because it isn't going to be done by others. And that will be uncomfortable, but that's okay.
Yeah. And I think the other part is it's great to know that, someone who probably didn't have the intention that this song turns into an anthem for, maybe it's only the anthem for 2023, who knows where it goes, but it's great to see that, someone who's thoughtful and considered and passionate can break through and can make an impact. And, that to some extent gives us some hope, and some direction to say, there can be breakthrough there. And it's about being persistent and, and also making sure that the purity of the message stays there and it doesn't get caught up in all the other bits. And it just is the message for its message's sake. So
totally. Awesome. And I appreciate you continuing to work with us, with People Purpose Place. Christine's unwell this week, but it would be awesome to continue this conversation exactly that, for its own sake. Allowing people to jump on board and to interrogate ideas and offer whatever critique they can.
Absolutely. And we're hoping to, the next couple of weeks, get some other interviewers back in place. So we've got a couple who are brewing, so that'll be great. So look forward to catching up next time.
Thanks, Dazza. Have a cracking day as always.
Thank you. Speak soon.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.